Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC 298, which goes down this weekend. A phenomenal card headlined by a featherweight championship fight between probably the greatest to ever do it in the featherweight division, Alexander Volkanovski, versus the rising star who's now officially in the elite of the elite, Ilia Topuria. It's a great fight, but we've got other awesome fights across the entire card as well. It's a really fun card. I think it's going to deliver from a fight perspective as well. Super excited for it and excited to break it down as well. But just before we do get into the breakdowns, as always, if you do want to jump into the action this weekend, then you can do so. Make sure you go to MMAplay365.com. We've got the handicapper advice, so my betting advice. That's recommended bets with breakdowns. That's my official bets as well, alongside the fun parlays, the fun parlay options, so you can build your own parlay as well. And then, of course, Bayes AI, our UFC prediction software, predicting every single possible outcome of every single fight on the entire card, and you get both that Bayes AI and the handicapper advice all under one subscription, either $4.99 for the event, $10 a month, or $99 for the year. So again, if you want to jump into the fun, jump into the action, that's MMAplay365.com. But now let's jump straight into the breakdowns. And of course, as always, we start with the main event, the featherweight championship fight. We've got Alexander Volkanovski versus the challenger Ilia Topuria. Now, this is a really interesting fight, and I might actually spend a little bit longer on this than what I normally do on some fights. But I do feel like it's warranted because there's a lot going on. You've got your stylistic clash, your stylistic matchup, should I say, and then you've got your mental aspect of the fight, and then there's some narrative as well. So again, you don't always want to base everything on narrative. You can't base everything on narrative. You know, you have to go into the analysis, and again, the stylistic matchup can sometimes be just important as the mental aspect of a fight as well. But there is some interesting narrative that I do feel, you know, has to be covered and used alongside the other aspects of the breakdown. So, look, from a stylistic perspective, it's an elite fight. Alexander Volkanovski, like I said in the introduction, you know, there's arguably the best ever UFC featherweight that we've had. You know, he's as elite, great striker, great wrestler, great grappler, great cardio, great volume. You know, he's been a very solid fighter for a very long time in the UFC, and it did take a while for him to rise up to, you know, become a champion, but he's just great everywhere. And you look at Ilia Topuria and you can say the exact same thing about him. He's striking solid, wrestling solid, grappling solid. Now, from the stylistic perspective, I do think that the wrestling and grappling could be a bit nullified in this fight, because I kind of feel like the defense of both fighters from a wrestling and grappling perspective is better than the offensive wrestling and grappling of each opponent in this fight. So I kind of feel like, look, if what I'm trying to say is if Volkanovski takes Topuria down, I think he'd have to do a good job to get him down. But if he does get him down, I think Topuria could bounce right back up to his feet. And same the other way. I think, you know, I'm not saying Topuria couldn't take Volkanovski down, but I think if he does, Volkanovski bounces right back up. I don't think that there's going to be a significant amount of time from a grappling perspective for that to have an impact on the result of the fight. And neither fighter are like super relentless with takedowns either. So I do think that it is a fight that's going to be won and lost on the feet. And with that in mind, like I said, Alexander Volkanovski is a great striker, you know, mixes things up well between his punches, his kicks, combinations. He's got good volume, and it's been really difficult for fighters to actually keep up with Volkanovski in this featherweight division in regards to, you know, matching the quality of strikes, but also the pace and the pressure and the volume, the cardio. So I kind of think that if any fighter currently right now in the featherweight division is going to be able to match Volkanovski there, it's Topuria. Because, look, Topuria's got a hard low kick, but outside of that, his hand speed is super quick, he's super reactive, he doesn't waste strikes, you know, he doesn't throw for the sake of throwing, but he's got legitimate power in both hands as well, which if he can get Volkanovski's respect early on, if he hits Volkanovski with something that Volkanovski hasn't felt from any other fighter in this featherweight division, then again, it just helps this fight, progress. And I do think it's going to genuinely be a relatively close fight. But when you're looking at, again, from the stylistic perspective, you've got Topuria, who's probably going to be able to match Volkanovski in a way that no other fighter in the featherweight division has been able to since Volkanovski became a champion. Like I said, super fast hand speed, hits really hard in both hands. Look what he did to Josh Emmett, like he literally butchered him up, and it kind of reminds me of a featherweight version of a prime Tony Ferguson in regards to just being able to, pour that damage on your opponent and really, cause the visible impact on the face, but also have the power to be able to drop your opponent as well. I think Topuria is a rising star for a reason. And like I said, from Volkanovski's perspective, I feel like with Topuria as an opponent, he's got an opponent here that's going to be able to match where Volkanovski's great in fights, and that's going to produce not only a great fight, but I think it's going to bring the best out of Topuria as well. Now, I did mention that there's two other aspects of this fight, the mental and the narrative, and they kind of interchange within what I'm about to say and talk about, so I'll put them in within the same category. So, look, where I was at with Alexander Volkanovski, and remember, he's coming off that bad knockout against Islam Makhachev. Again, we don't normally see Volkanovski lose. I know he lost against Makhachev the first time he tried, he tried to become a double champion and beat him, but it was a super close fight. But to see Volkanovski lose in that way by a knockout that bad, it was surprising to see, even though he was the one stepping up against, the best in the world, in my opinion, in Islam Makhachev. But you look at the bigger picture here. Volkanovski is coming to the, rise up in the featherweight division. He beat Max Holloway, a fighter that nobody was beating at the time. He beat Max, then he beat him again. And, Volkanovski's proven that he's the best in the featherweight division, and there's levels, and he's just a level above everyone else. Even Max Holloway is a level above everyone below him, but Max can't beat Volkanovski. So there's not a lot for Volkanovski in the featherweight division. So he made, in my opinion, the right move to try and become a double champion. That's the situation where you try and become a double champion. So he moved up in weight. He fought Makhachev. I thought Makhachev was going to ragdoll him, if I'm being honest. But that fight was so close that Volkanovski actually created a very debatable argument for him to win that fight. A lot of people did think that Volkanovski won, and if he had won, there would have been no complaints from me or anybody else. It was just a super close fight. And even though Volkanovski lost, I feel like he got a sense of achievement from the fight being that close. So he comes back down in weight to his featherweight division, where he's still the champion. He fights Yair Rodriguez, makes easy work of Rodriguez, which again is a bit of a surprise because Rodriguez was on a tear himself, and the fact that Volkanovski made it look that simple and easy, just again outlines the fact that he's an elite fighter. So he beats Yair Rodriguez, and now it's time to go back up to lightweight to see if he can, repeat the type of fight that he had against Makhachev, and this time take the belt from him. Again, the right decision, in my opinion, from a career perspective. He moves up in weight, and he gets absolutely smoked by Makhachev with that knockout. He wasn't looking entirely great before that either. So now Volkanovski's got to come back down to the featherweight division, where he's still the champion, to defend his belt in a division where he feels like he's probably achieved everything that he can possibly achieve, and there's not that many, legitimate challenges for him in that division. What he really wanted to do was become a double champion, then have that option of potentially staying in the lightweight division now that he's cleaned out the featherweight division, or, so it seems that he's cleaned out the featherweight division. So from a mental perspective, there's questions of where Volkanovski's at, because he must be feeling really dejected now that the fact that he's got to go back down in weight to a division that he probably didn't want to stick around in for too long, because he's felt like he's achieved everything that he possibly can within that weight category, within that weight division. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a red flag, it's just a bit of a concern. But then where the red flag really starts to come in is, Alexander Volkanovski did that interview where he was talking about how he was drinking alcohol leading up to that Islam Makhachev fight. And, the result of what happened, I'm not saying obviously it was directly because of the alcohol, but that's a really strange mentality, in my opinion, for a fighter in that situation to be able to, actually go against probably everything that you've ever done in your life. In that type of fight where you're fighting to become a double champion against the best in the world, it's a really, really strange thing to hear. So it just, again, begs the question of where Volkanovski's at mentally. So now you couple the fact that, he did something he shouldn't have done or wouldn't have done normally back down in the featherweight division where he probably didn't want to be. There's just a lot going on with Alexander Volkanovski, and I just get that feeling that it might take a loss here and to lose his belt to really reignite Alexander Volkanovski. And we've seen it with previous fighters, like when Robert Whittaker lost to Israel Adesanya. Whittaker felt like there was a massive weight lifted off his shoulders. There's a certain pressure that comes with being a UFC champion, and for a lot of fighters it does get a little bit too much when you are a champion and have been a champion for a long period of time. I kind of feel that Volkanovski might be within that category, but then you look at Topuria's mentality and the way he's coming into this fight. This dude is focused, dialed in, zoned in. He's got one objective, and that's to become the champion. He's sounding confident, but he's looking confident. You can tell he feels like he's already won this fight, and the difference in mentality you've got here between Topuria and where I think Volkanovski is night and day. And then, like I said, you go back to the stylistic matchup. I think that Volkanovski is definitely the most dangerous fighter Topuria is definitely the most dangerous fighter that Volkanovski could fight right now in the featherweight division, and probably the only fighter that's really got that, dangerous, nasty ability to be able to hit Volkanovski and potentially beat him. I think it's one of those where you're starting to put everything together, and I do feel like it might be a changing of the guard type of fight. So look, I know this breakdown was really long. There was a lot that I really needed, from my perspective, that a lot that I wanted to cover and talk about because there's different angles. But all in all, I do think everything is pointing to a great fight, a solid fight, but I can't help but lean on the side of Topuria when everything's put together. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ilia Topuria to win this fight and become the new UFC featherweight champion. And in the next fight, the co-main event, we've got Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa, and I think this is a really great fight as well. The one thing that I'm going to mention, and this actually applies to this fight specifically, obviously, and the following fight within this breakdown podcast as well. So for the next two fights that I break down, this applies. The breakdowns, the analysis, picking winners, it is not a popularity contest. So I don't care if everybody hates a certain fighter. It's not going to change the way I look at that fighter's fighting abilities. It's not going to change the way that I look at the analysis and how I break that fighter down, style against style, skill set against skill set. And the reason I say that is because, look, Paulo Costa, he had a lot of hype around him. Everybody loved him, but now he's like completely the opposite side of the coin. Like, he's one-hated. A lot of people a lot of fans very much dislike him. You go into his Instagram posts, he posts one Instagram post maybe about training, and then suddenly look at the comments. Everybody's, giving him a hard time. Not that I don't think it bothers Costa at all, but from what you're going to hear from, I think a lot of fans is a lot of uptake and talking up of the opponent, so Robert Whittaker in this case, and don't always take that negativity towards one fighter because a fan doesn't like that type of fight because that fighter's done some questionable things as, legitimate reasons for why that fighter's going to lose. Robert Whittaker might win this fight, but it's not going to be because people don't like Paulo Costa. It's going to be because Robert Whittaker's a better fighter than Paulo Costa if he beats him. So, look, with that out the way, I do think this is a really great fight. I think that Paulo Costa's actually super skilled. I think he's a great striker, but he's also got a really underrated wrestling and grappling game as well that you don't often see. And yeah, look, Costa's done some, like I said, some questionable things. There was the Marvin Vettori fight where that's supposed to have been at middleweight, and Paulo Costa left it quite late until he told the UFC and Vettori that he wasn't going to make middleweight, and Vettori, kindly decided, look, I'm definitely going to fight you no matter what, and they did it at a weight class above. And look, like I said, Costa is been a product of his own downfall in regards to, the fan base himself, like he's only got himself to blame, but from an actual skill set perspective, I think he's a very technical fighter. Like, I don't think he gets the credit he deserves. And even you look at the Luke Rockhold fight, a lot of people will be like, oh yeah, but Rockhold was washed and he's only ever one punch away from getting knocked out. And I think the reason why Costa looked so bad in the public eye in that fight is because everybody was expecting Costa to land one punch and knock Rockhold out. But look, you've got to hand it to Luke Rockhold. He fought a decent fight. He literally gave every last bit of his fighting soul in that fight. And I feel like it was always going to be really hard to knock him out with that mindset. You know, Rockhold came in for one last ride and really put everything in it. And you know, Costa still beat him comfortably. He was still sprawling. He was still getting back up with Rockhold on top of him. I think that Costa's an underrated fighter that's getting overlooked in this fight because of the popularity contest, and it's not about that. Look, Robert Whittaker's an elite fighter still himself. I do wonder if he's a bit, for a lack of a better phrase, maybe like damaged goods, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but with Duplessis knocking him out the way he did, you know, first of all dropped him with the hard jab, but at the bottom line of it was a jab, and Whittaker has always been known for being tough and being able to take strikes, unless he's fighting Adesanya, who was the best in the world. So for Whittaker to get dropped by a jab and then finishing the way he was against Duplessis, I know Duplessis is now the champion, so it's not a loss that's aged badly at all, but I just wonder whether Whittaker has, again, similar to what I said with Volkanovski, and I'm pretty sure the Aussies are going to hate me, but with Whittaker, he's achieved what he needed to achieve, and then he needed to not be the UFC champion to, reignite his career, and he did that, but then he lost against Duplessis, and I'm pretty sure Whittaker thought before that Duplessis fight, he's got one more run, one more go at the title, but now that's gone. So where's Whittaker at? Are we going to see now the downfall of Whittaker as the division's changing a little bit? But he's fighting Paulo Costa here, who's not going to go away. I think 3 rounds is definitely better for Costa. I think if this was like a 5-round fight night main event, then Whittaker, would be a much heavier favourite than what he is. But Costa, for me, has got 3 solid rounds in him. He hits hard as fuck. He's got decent wrestling, decent grappling. I think Whittaker might be able to get a couple of takedowns, but I think Costa can get back up. And I do think that Whittaker's got the better cardio, but Costa can fight through that cardio barrier. We saw that against Vettori in the 5 rounds. Like, Costa was carrying more weight then as well because of obviously the botched weight cut. So he was carrying more muscle mass, more weight. He looked completely and utterly gassed after round 1, but still went 5 hard rounds with Vettori, like, competitively. So I think that Costa's got decent cardio barrier fighting abilities, if that makes sense. Like, he's able to get to fight through the cardio, and if he's putting pace and pressure on Whittaker and hitting Whittaker with hard shots, I'm not sure how Whittaker withstands the shots that Costa takes if he was, getting dropped by the Dricus jab, if that makes sense. I just feel that it's a close fight because Whittaker is genuinely the better technical fighter. Like, he's a better technical striker, he's a better wrestler, better grappler, but I kind of feel that the wrestling, grappling, defense side of Costa is going to be just enough to make this fight won and lost on the feet. And on the feet, you've got the technical abilities of Whittaker versus the brute force of Costa. And we know that more often than not, if this was to go to a decision, the judges are going to like the harder shots from Costa than the technical shots from Whittaker. But I just think it's one of these fights that's going to be razor close. I think it's really tough to pick a winner in this fight because both of them, I could see a way to victory, a path to victory for both sides here for sure. Like I say, Whittaker's the cleaner fighter, but Costa being aggressive and having power, and Whittaker, we're not sure where he's at in regards to, where his mentality's at, where he's at in regards to his career. In my opinion, I think it's a really difficult fight to, be super confident on either side of which fighter's going to win. But what I do know is that, like I've already mentioned, the judges like the aggressive power shots from fighters nowadays. That sits on the side of Costa. I know Costa's mentality is bulletproof. Like, the dude just cares about himself in regards to, I don't mean that in a bad way, I just mean that he cares about himself as a fighter more than he cares about anything else. I think he's going to be dialed in again here, and again, we're just not sure where Whittaker's at. So from the fight being close, to Costa landing hard shots, potentially getting a knockout, but the judges loving that type of fighter. And I know that Costa isn't going to give a fuck about what anybody else thinks about him. He's going to come in there and look to run through any opponent that he's facing. Again, I kind of like that mentality as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Paulo Costa to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a rebooked fight. It should have happened late last year. We've got Geoff Neal versus Ian Machado Garry. Now, with Ian Garry, so this is what I meant about the start of the Whittaker and Costa breakdown. This is what I meant about the popularity contest comment. So, look, Ian Garry, again, is a fighter that had a massive fan base. I think a lot of people were liking him. But then after the whole Strickland thing that happened, and I'm not going to get into that. Just, if you're interested, Google Strickland and Ian Garry and you'll see everything yourself. But after the whole Strickland and Garry thing, I feel that Gary's lost a lot of his fan base. And again, a lot of people are disliking Garry now, where they did like him before. But again, this game is not a popularity contest. If Ian Garry loses this fight against Geoff Neal, it's not going to be because people don't like him. It's going to be because Neal beat him as a fighter versus a fighter. So again, you've got to understand that. But for me here, Ian Garry's the better fighter. He's got the higher ceiling. He's on a higher rise. I think that he's just got to mind his P's and Q's here against a fighter like Geoff Neal, because Neal is a southpaw. He's explosive. He's got power. He's got experience. He's been in there with the best of the best, better levels of competition than what Ian Garry's been fighting by an absolute mile. So Gary's got to be very cautious of that. Like I said, mind his P's and Q's, I think, is the best phrase to use. Just make sure that he's not getting hit by a clean shot. We've seen Ian Garry can get dropped, but even though he was dropped by Sonkanan, the recoverability was there to the point where he got back up, survived the round, and then finished Sonkanan later in the fight. So we've got the mindset of Garry, we've got the recoverability of Garry. So even if he does get hit with something hard from Neal, unless it's a punch that knocks Garry out cold or just knocks or hurts him that badly that Neal continues to, land the ground and pound, and the referee stops it. Look, I'm not saying that Neal's got a puncher's chance only, like he is a good fighter, but I think Gary's more technical. I think he's going to pump out more volume. I think that his movement's a little bit better. He's going to have a speed advantage. I don't see any wrestling and grappling in this fight. I think it's striker versus striker, and it's going to play out in that way. I just feel that Ian Garry's going to land more volume on Geoff Neal. I think he's going to look cleaner with the strikes. Also the defense as well. If Neal is getting to a point where he's just whiffing on a lot of the punches and Gary's movement's good, speed's good, I think Gary's just a really, really much more technical fighter than Geoff Neal is at this point. And I think it's going to show on the night. Look, Neal's going to have his moments for sure, but the speed, the movement, youthful energy, the rise of Ian Garry as a fighter, I think is going to show on the night. Look, like I say, Geoff Neal, he's not a fighter that's on his way down or anything like that. I just feel that Gary's rise is very real here, and I think we're going to see it. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ian Machado Garry to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a super intriguing fight. We've got Merab Dvalishvili versus Henry Cejudo, and like I said, just even saying those two guys' names, the fact that they're fighting each other is amazing. I'm looking forward to the wrestling aspect of this fight. The one thing I will say straight away off the bat is that I don't agree with the line in this fight, the betting line in this fight. The odds having Dvalishvili up at close to -200, I think is way too high. And look, I love Dvalishvili. I've cashed in pretty much every single fight in the UFC. I'm sure there was one fight actually it was like -400, -500 that I couldn't do anything with. But aside from that, even against Petr Yan, he was like +200, cashed it easily there. But against Henry Cejudo's going to present some problems for Dvalishvili that he's not faced before, and it's that level of wrestling. Like, look, we know what we're going to get with Dvalishvili is an absolute his pace on legs, pressure on legs. He'll be relentless, coming forwards at all times. He will eat shots. He's a monster. He's a pressure, forward pressure, pacey monster that will just keep coming forwards and just be a nightmare for you to deal with. But where Dvalishvili normally separates himself in fights is with relentless wrestling. So he is absolutely a fighter that will hit 10, 11, 12 plus takedowns in a fight. His top control's never really been the best, hence why he hits so many takedowns in fights, because the opponents keep getting back up, so he just keeps taking them back down, and it's absolutely fine. Even though, look, if he was only hitting 2 takedowns and they're getting back up, then the wrestling's not really going to play a factor. But when you're relentless and you're hitting a high number of takedowns, then yeah, that's then a problem. Then you add the pace and the pressure. He's a very difficult fighter to deal with. With Henry Cejudo, Henry Cejudo is an Olympic level freestyle wrestler. That's his style. He's a very high level wrestler, so it's very intriguing to see what's going to happen in this fight. Does Dvalishvili actually take Cejudo down plenty of times and dump him and dump him and dump him? Or does Cejudo, has he got a really good game plan here where he's going to deal with the wrestling and start to try and outstrike Dvalishvili? And again, from a striking perspective, I think Henry Cejudo's the better technical striker. And he can put volume together and he can hurt that lead leg. He's got a good low kick. But even though Dvalishvili isn't as technical from a striking perspective, he's efficient striking. And I say this all the time, the judges do not score technique, they score strikes landed, and Dvalishvili can hit a high number of strikes. So again, I feel like it's a fight that does kind of favour Dvalishvili, because I think he's going to be the one moving forwards more often than not, which means that he's probably going to be the more successful wrestler in this fight, even though the Olympic gold medal of Henry Cejudo and the fact that, he is a high-level freestyle wrestler tells you that he's probably the better wrestler. But if Cejudo's on the back foot, then Dvalishvili is probably going to have more success from a striking perspective and a wrestling perspective as well. And I can actually see a situation where Dvalishvili is just shooting and shooting and shooting, because that's what he knows, and he's got the cardio to do that. He's got the cardio for days. It's a bottomless gas tank with Dvalishvili. He can do it for 5 rounds. We saw that against Petr Yan, but he's back down to 3 rounds here, so he's got no issues in just constantly shooting at Cejudo. And I think it's going to be one of those fights where Dvalishvili doesn't look super clean, but he's just the one that's controlling the fight and doing what he needs to do. And I think that's what it's going to come down to. Again, I don't foresee a finish on Dvalishvili's side. I'd be surprised. So if it goes to a decision, I think the judges are going to have no choice but to score it to Dvalishvili, just because he's the one that's been constantly forcing everything in the fight. I think Cejudo, he's got a tough fight ahead of him. I think it's going to be really interesting from the wrestling perspective, because if he does counter Dvalishvili, no one's going to be surprised, but then it really does change the way the fight goes. But with Dvalishvili, he's just forward, pressure, pace, cardio, relentless, takedown after takedown, and he's just a nightmare to deal with. And I feel like Henry Cejudo's going to see it and feel it in this fight. So for those reasons, I'm picking Merab Dvalishvili to win this fight. And talking of relentless takedowns, we've got Anthony Hernandez versus Roman Kopylov. And Anthony Hernandez, his style has completely changed. I mean, he's always been a tricky grappler with some wrestling, but man, he's developed really well, and he's now got a relentless takedown game, just like Dvalishvili. Not quite as relentless in regards to, pace and pressure, but it's pretty close. And it's, if we were talking about this 2 or 3 fights ago, you'd have thought, you're crazy for saying Hernandez is going to have this style, but his wrestling has got really good, and it's not just his initial shot, it's the chain wrestling against the cage, going from the single to the double, back to the single, trying to sneak around to the back, looking for trips, throws, drag downs. He's just relentless in trying to get the fight down to the mat. But again, I know I'm going to, reference Dvalishvili here, but unlike Dvalishvili, Hernandez has got a really good top control game where he can control the positions, he can look for submissions, and if you do get back up, you eventually get back up after maybe 30, 60, 90 seconds, and the opponent feels, thank fuck I'm back up to my feet. Bang, you're back down again. And it's a demoralising style to fight against, because then you're going to spend the next minute or 2 minutes on your back. I think Hernandez is going to be a really tough fight for a lot of fighters at this level. Once he starts really hitting or if he gets to the top 10, I think he's then going to have to start, coming up with a bit of a plan B. But he looks like he's fixed his striking up quite a lot as well. However, that's not really going to play too much of a factor in this fight, because Roman Kopylov's the better striker. I've spoken about how good Hernandez is, but Roman Kopylov, elite level striker, he's very calm and patient, but he's got that brutal edge to his striking where he'll flatline you if he catches you with a good shot. We saw that last time out. Kopylov is definitely going to be the better striker here, but is Hernandez going to let him strike? And that's the biggest question. This is why wrestling is arguably, I don't know how many people would argue it, but I believe that wrestling is the best discipline within mixed martial arts, because it's in this type of fight where it's going to be Hernandez that decides where the fight goes, because he's eventually going to get close to Kopylov and he's going to shoot. And if he doesn't and he tries to test the striking, I think it's a bad move, but he'll learn very quickly that the striking ain't going to be there for him, and then he'll just decide to wrestle. But I think he's going to have that wrestling game plan anyway, and Roman Kopylov can be taken down. It is difficult to take him down. I'll give it to Kopylov. His takedown defense is pretty decent. His get-up game is where it's tough, though. When he's actually flattened on his back, shoulder to shoulder on the mat, he gives up some bad positions, showing his back, trying to get back up to his feet, and he can be controlled. If you get him in mount, he then gets stuck, for example. So I think there's a massive gap in the grappling. Hernandez has just got to get that fight down to the mat. But with how Hernandez chain wrestles and how relentless he is with it, I think he does get the fight down to the mat. I think that's where the fight is going to... I think that's where we're going to see the fight more often than not on the mat, within the wrestling takedowns, the transitions, the chain wrestling, and then the fight down to the mat. So I think that's where the fight's won and lost, and you can't look past Hernandez in that type of scenario. I do think that Kopylov's going to have some moments because, look, the fight starts on the feet, so from the opening bell, Hernandez is going to have a threat on the opposite side of the cage against him. But the sooner he gets that wrestling going, the better. And I think he is very successful with the wrestling and grappling in this fight and does drown Kopylov, potentially a finish along the way, but if not, a clear decision. So for those reasons, I'm picking Anthony Hernandez to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a pretty binary fight from a stylistic matchup perspective. We've got Amanda Lemos versus Mackenzie Dern. And it reminds me I think it's very similar to last week when we had Armen Petrosian and Rodolfo Vieira. I picked Rodolfo Vieira to win. And again, I kind of feel like it's the same in this fight. You've got Mackenzie Dern, who is the woman equivalent to Rodolfo Vieira. She might even be more credentialed than Rodolfo Vieira. It's very close. But look, Mackenzie Dern is a jiu-jitsu phenom. It's absolutely no secret that that's where she's best. But to be fair and to give Mackenzie Dern credit, her striking has picked up a little bit, which helps her find the takedowns. Because, again, this was always one of the issues with Dern. The jiu-jitsu was that good, but she struggled to really get takedowns when she was fighting upper level in competition, if that makes sense. So the takedowns weren't there, and a lot of the reason for that is the fact that the hands weren't there, the striking wasn't there, because you've got to use the striking in a very competitive way to be able to close the distance, find the entries to the takedowns, and get the fight down to the mat. Like, if you don't have your striking, all it's going to be is takedown after takedown. You're not setting anything up. And again, at this level in the UFC, it needs to be more than that, because that's just not going to cut it. So Dern has improved on her striking, and the striking is looking better. And because of that, the wrestling will become a little bit better, and therefore she can get the fights to where she needs to get them. Now, on the other side of the coin here, you've got Amanda Lemos. Now, Lemos' wrestling and grappling, she's no slouch there. She's very good there as well. She's actually a pretty good all-round fighter. It's just the grappling's not on the level of Dern's, and that will show if and when the fight hits the mat. Now, Amanda Lemos, she's a very dangerous striker. I wouldn't say she's got like an insane amount of volume and, puts long combinations together, but she's a very hard-hitting striker. Like, you can tell that every strike that she throws is just methodically breaking the opponent down, whether it's a low kick it hits hard, whether it's a jab it hits hard, and of course she's got knockouts as well. So that's what I mean from... I think this is a very binary fight from a stylistic perspective, because you've got Amanda Lemos that, look, if this is a 15-minute kickboxing fight, then I think Lemos hurts Mackenzie Dern, probably knocks her out. But if Dern doesn't allow for it to be a 15-minute kickboxing fight and is looking for the wrestling and the grappling, the fight will likely hit the mat. And when it hits the mat, then Dern's got every chance of finishing Lemos, or at least just controlling the rest of that round that she's on top. And again, in these types of fights, more often than not, I will usually side with the grappler, because again, like, a lot of fights hit the mat when one fighter wants the fight to hit the mat. And I think, we saw that last week with Vieira. Vera was actually getting chewed up from the outside, just as everyone predicted, but then the takedown started happening. As soon as the takedown started happening, you saw the biggest gap in skill in the fight, and I think a similar thing's going to happen here. I think Lemos, in the early moments, is going to be hurting Dern, is going to be putting some nice strikes on her, but when those takedowns start coming, I do think Dern can get the fight down to the mat. She might only need to get it down once or twice, maybe over a couple of rounds, and I think she'd be able to get the finish. If she doesn't, do I see a scenario where Dern can get at least one takedown in 2 rounds and potentially win a 29-28, losing the other round she doesn't get the takedown in at a minimum? Yeah, I think so. Look, I think Dern has got the biggest gap in skill in this fight, just like Vera had it against Armen Petrosian last weekend. And it's for those reasons I'm picking Mackenzie Dern to win this fight. And in the next fight, we're in the heavyweight division. We've got their big boys here. We've got Rogerio de Lima versus Justin Tafa. So, yeah, look, it's one of those fights where it's always hard to be overconfident in regards to who's going to win because, it's the heavyweight division and both of these dudes hit really hard. They've both got really good, technical backgrounds as well in regards to kickboxing and Thai, and I know some of the strikes can sometimes look a little bit swing and hope, but they have both got decent technique. So with De Lima, he's more diverse in regards to the arsenal of strikes that he'll throw. Like, he does have a powerful low kick, but, Tafa's a southpaw fighter, so that low kick might not be as available as what it would be in other fights, but I don't think that's going to stop De Lima going for the inside low kick and damaging the leg that way. It just means it's not going to be as quick to the target as what it would be if it was, conventional versus conventional or southpaw versus southpaw. So I still think there's going to be an attack with the leg kick, but he is more diverse, De Lima. In regards to the actual strikes, though, I do think that Tafa has got that raw one. And then, look, I know De Lima's got raw one-shot knockout power as well, but I think Tafa's got more of a death touch, shall we say. So for me, again, looking at mixed martial artist versus mixed martial artist, De Lima's got some wrestling, some topside grappling, and I do think that it's going to be smart for him to lean on that. Does he lean on it? Does he try and beat Tafa at his own game? We never know. And De Lima's not the type of fighter that, again, I know I've referenced him a few times already, but like a Merab Dvalishvili, he's going to shoot takedowns. You just know he is. Whereas De Lima, there's always that uncertainty of does he, doesn't he? But I do think it would favour him in this fight. And if he does, I think he gets Tafa down relatively easily. And I think that from a top control perspective, I'm not sure that Tafa gets back up to his feet with De Lima on top of him, because De Lima's got a really heavy top pressure game. But not only that, and I say this all the time with the heavyweights, even if a 265-pound man has got a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt underneath him, at that type of weight, it's very difficult to get back up to your feet. Normally in this heavyweight division, when one man settles the other man on the mat, the man on his back, both shoulders on the mat, it's tough for him to work back up to his feet. And I think with Tafa, that's one of the holes in Tafa's game anyway, in regards to the grappling side, the defensive grappling. So I think that De Lima's got a real path to victory. It's just, does he get the fight to that path to victory, or does he try and knock Tafa out? If he tries to knock Tafa out, it becomes a very 50-50 fight, and probably slightly in the favour of Tafa. But the fact that it's going to be that close in the area where Tafa's strongest, and the fight isn't going to be that close should De Lima use the second path to victory and take the fight down to the mat, it has to favour De Lima from a stylistic perspective. When you're looking at this fight pre-fight, De Lima could win on the feet, he could win with wrestling and grappling, whereas Tafa can only win on the feet. And again, it's not like he's levels above De Lima in regards to the striking. So for those reasons, I'm picking Rogerio de Lima to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the biggest favourite on the card, Rinya Nakamura versus Carlos Vera. And I just think this is a massive mismatch. I don't see this fight going any way but a Nakamura win. Nakamura, he's got the wrestling background, and it's very strong wrestling as well, but he's also got a really good top control game where he can control his fighter. So again, I'm going to reference him again. Probably should call this the Merab Dvalishvili show, but Merab Dvalishvili is a fighter that can get any fighter down. struggles to keep him down, whereas Nakamura is different. He will get fighters down to the mat. He's got solid wrestling, but he's also got that good grappling game as well. Good topside grappling, good submissions, ground and pound. He's the full package when it comes to the wrestling and grappling. But this is a fighter that can also knock you out on the feet as well. So, you know, obviously on the feet is where Vera's going to want to keep it and probably where he's going to have his best chances. But again, I think that Vera's got a puncher's chance, which, to be fair, is, like I've always said, it's real. This level in the UFC, 4-ounce gloves, elite fighters, you know, the puncher's chance is legitimate. But outside of that puncher's chance, does he get up on the strikes? Well, no, I don't think he does, because even if he starts to, then Nakamura is just going to take him down. But I think Nakamura is the better striker, wrestler, grappler. It's a really, really tough fight. Look, props to Vera for actually stepping up and fighting Nakamura, because I can't imagine there's going to be a lot of fighters with their hands up to take this fight. But Vera has taken it, and again, credit where credit's due. You've got to hand it to him, but I think it's a fight that Nakamura runs through him. I think Nakamura is going to keep having these types of performances until he hits the top 15, maybe top 10, and then he's going to start to be tested a little bit. But he's a fighter with a super high ceiling that I think could go a very, very long way. In this specific fight, I think it's a bit of a mismatch. I'm picking Rinya Nakamura to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mingyang Zhang versus Brendson Ribeiro. And this was really interesting tape, to be honest. There was a lot of intriguing things, is the only word that I'm going to use without any real explanation on the Ribeiro side whilst I was watching tape. Like I said, I'm not going to say any more, but there was some very intriguing and interesting things that happened in, you know, the fights leading up to him getting into the Contender Series. So yeah, look, go back, watch the fights, some low-level fights there as well. I don't think he's been tested by the best competition, whereas Zhang on the other side, again, you could make the same argument about Zhang. You know, he hasn't really been tested by the best competition to date. However, you look back at the fight, Zhang wasn't looking that great and losing, and he's been knocked out a couple of times as well. Zhang's still really young, and he's one of these Chinese fighters that clearly started fighting very, very early, a little bit like a Song Yadong. And I feel like he's taken his bad losses and he's taken some knockouts, which isn't good at, like, when he's getting flatlined at 20 years old by hard, powerful men. But he seems to have developed in a really, really nice way, to the point where his defense has picked up a little bit. He's no longer getting hit with those hard shots, and because of that, I feel like the durability hasn't been knocked. Again, he was young when this was happening anyway, so it's not as if he's older and he's getting rocked and knocked about a little bit. You know, that durability I don't think has been damaged too much. That's going to help him in this fight, because Brendson Ribeiro does hit hard, and I think it's one of these fights where they're both relatively well-rounded. They prefer to strike, but they will wrestle and grapple if need be. But I kind of feel like the wrestling and grappling is going to be a bit nullified in this fight. Like, if one of them does hit a takedown and gets the opponent down, it's not going to be easy. But if they get them down, I can't see it being a case of either of these fighters is going to start spending like 2 or 3 minutes on top of the opponent. If you are going to force me to which side that's more likely to happen on, I actually think Zhang's probably more likely to spend more time on Ribeiro than the other way around. But I do think it's going to be a striking battle here. They're both big fighters for the division, tall, long, so I think it's a really well-matched fight, but I think Zhang's just a better quality of fighter. I also like the fact that Zhang's made the move over to, I think it's Extreme Couture, so he's made that gym movement as well to improve and develop his game. I think that's going to show. So yeah, I think Zhang's a better quality fighter. I think he's a fighter that's still developing, he's still very young, and I think we're going to see the best version of Zhang in this specific fight, and we might be saying that for the next 3 or 4 fights at least as well. So yeah, look, I think Ribeiro is going to be dangerous for the division. I think he's going to have, you know, that explosive nature and quality about him where he can end any fight. But if he does try and put a storm on an opponent and it's weathered, then he's the type of fighter that I think that will struggle a little bit once he realises that the opponent's still there and he hasn't got them out of there. I think Zhang's the perfect fighter to weather that type of storm and then be able to put it on Ribeiro therefore after. And for those reasons, I'm picking Mingyang Zhang to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got an interesting fight here between Josh Quinlan and Danny Barlow. Now, Danny Barlow making his UFC debut from the Contender Series, nickname Left Hand to God, and it's very easy to see why he's got that nickname, because that left hand is ridiculous. It's fast, it's accurate, it's got knockout power in it, and because of that, I'm just really interested to see how he handles stepping into the UFC. Look, Quinlan isn't like this super experienced fighter that, Danny Barlow's got an uphill challenge against, but Quinlan does have UFC experience. He's been in there, he's had his rounds in the UFC already. And eventually, look, when you're looking for one shot, when you've got that one specific finishing ability, at the UFC level, it doesn't tend to happen as much as what it happens in the regional scene. So sure, this left hand of Danny Barlow is going to be wiping everyone out regionally, but when you step in the UFC, it's a different level of competition, and I'm just really interested to see if he's got a plan B for if this doesn't happen. Now, I'm not saying that he only throws that left hand, because he doesn't. It's just that left hand is the equaliser, or has been on the regional scene. Danny Barlow, he does actually remind me a little bit of a smaller version of a Jamal Hill, if I'm being honest. And this is what I mean. I don't know what we're going to get. Are we going to actually see the skills and the quality of Danny Barlow, where after this fight, I do think actually, yeah, look, he is a mini version of a Jamal Hill? Or are we going to see Danny Barlow struggle because Josh Quinlan doesn't get knocked out and doesn't drop like his opponents have been on the regional scene, and suddenly runs out of options? So yeah, look, for that reason, it's an intriguing fight, but I do genuinely see some good qualities from Danny Barlow, so I'm not suggesting that that's exactly what we're going to see. It's just he's now fighting an opponent, a level of an opponent that isn't just going to go away with one shot. And Josh Quinlan, look, he's not a bad fighter. He's a good all-round type of fighter. He's got power on his feet. He'll mix things up with low kicks as well. He's got a good grappling game. I think grappling's actually his base. His jiu-jitsu's his base. So, he's got that heading for him here. Danny Barlow, we have seen him taken down. Admittedly, it's not easy to take him down. I've only seen really like one or two pretty simple takedowns on him, but that might be because he's foreseen a fight that's, fighting against a striker, and then suddenly it's caught him by surprise. That's a possibility. But I think Quinlan's got the ability to get the fight down to the mat. I think if he's on top of Barlow and he gets Barlow's shoulders flat on the mat as well, I think that, that could potentially be a way that Quinlan starts to draw this fight in his favour. And like I said, Quinlan's not a bad striker himself. I just feel that although Danny Barlow is the more explosive striker, I think Quinlan probably took the loss in his last fight at the right time. And facing Danny Barlow here, again, it's a close fight. It's a really close fight, because like I said, I just don't know with Danny Barlow if it is going to be a little bit tough for him if that left hand isn't causing a shitload of damage on Quinlan. And if it does get tough, I think Quinlan's the type of fighter that will be able to slowly and methodically take over. It's a tough fight to call, because Danny Barlow might be the insane exceptional fighter that I think he's got the potential to be, but at the same time, until I absolutely see that against a UFC level opponent like Quinlan, who's had experience already in the UFC, has took that loss probably at the right time last time out, until I see that, I can't be 100% confident of it. I am actually going to side with Quinlan in this fight, just because I know what I'm going to get with Quinlan. I know that he's a very technical striker. I know he's got power just like Barlow's got power, but the wrestling and grappling side I think could really play in his favour should he go down that route to victory as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Josh Quinlan to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Val Woodburn versus Oban Elliott. Oban Elliott from the Cage Warriors scene is a fighter that I've watched a lot of, really exciting fighter. It is, however, though, one fight where, or another fight, shall I say, where I'm not quite in agreement with the betting line. I think Oban Elliott's a little bit too wide here, and that's not because I think that Val Woodburn is, going to match Oban Elliott from a technical perspective, but Woodburn's going to be smaller, stockier, more explosive, more powerful, trying everything to close the distance with big punches, and Oban Elliott can get hit a little bit too much at times, and it just begs the question, if Val Woodburn is really insistent on being aggressive and closing the distance and maybe eating a couple of straight punches on the way in to make sure he can land, a hard punch or a hard combination himself on a fighter that does get hit a little bit too much, then, it's going to give him an opportunity in this fight. But With that being said, I think that Oban Elliott's the better striker, the better grappler, better wrestler. Oban Elliott is the epitome of a Cage Warriors fighter that has come into the UFC, where he's been battle tested, he's good everywhere, he's fine striking, fine grappling, can wrestle if he needs to as well. And he's got that typical Cage Warriors all-round style of fighter. And normally in these types of fights in the UFC debut, it's the Cage Warriors fighter or the ex-Cage Warriors fighter that's coming out on top. And I kind of feel that that's going to happen here. Like I said, Woodburn comes with his dangers, absolutely. But outside of, over pressuring Elliott and landing something that hurts him or knocks him out, I think that Elliott's going to have, the cleaner strikes. I think he's going to be a fighter that, again, if he gets inside the clinch, he might be out-muscled in the clinch. But if he, reaps a leg or gets a quick trip down to the mat and gets on top of Woodburn, panics, turns his back, tries to stand up, and Elliott flows with it and gets his hooks in. That type of performance, I just feel Elliott's gonna be just a little bit above Val Woodburn in regards to, being slightly better in every single area, and that should lead to Elliott getting the win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Oban Elliott to win this fight. And in the next fight, the final fight of the breakdown, we've got Andrea Lee versus Miranda Maverick. Now, Andrea Lee, I think, has had a massive fall from grace. In the UFC, she was hyped to be, one of the more dangerous fighters in the division with a high ceiling, but she's actually coming into this fight on the second 3-fight losing streak that she's had in the UFC. And although the 3-fight losing streak this time is actually pretty legitimate, and I'll explain what I mean by that, the fact that she's lost 3 times in a row twice in the UFC, there is a cause for concern there. Now, this time the losses have come against Natalia Silva, Macy Barber, Viviane Araújo, who are all top fighters in the division, and those 3 fighters will beat most of the other fighters in the division. So there's not too much that you can really knock Andrea Lee for there. However, the last 3-fight losing streak was Joanne Wood, no longer with the UFC, Lauren Murphy, not really sure if she's with the UFC anymore, Roxanne Modafferi. Again, I don't think she's with the UFC anymore. So that was a bad 3-fight losing streak. And then she won 2 on the bounce, Antonina Shevchenko, Cynthia Calvillo. Again, they aren't the top fighters in the division. Then she goes on another 3-fight losing streak. So against Miranda Maverick, I kind of put Miranda Maverick within the same type of category as Natalia Silva, Barbara and Araújo in regards to, not that she's better than any of those 3 fighters, but Miranda Maverick's going to beat more opponents in this division than she's not, and I kind of feel Andrea Lee is going to be one of them. Also with Andrea Lee, when she has too much pressure facing her, she does seem to crumble a little bit, maybe drops mentally as well. You can hear the coach in the corner, telling her to wake up and just fight, and, you can see that it does demoralise her when she's facing too much pressure and she can't be the bully in the cage. When she's not the one that's going to have the physicality advantages, that can, land the harder shots, get the fight down to the mat, spend time on top. When she's not the bully in the cage, she struggles, and I kind of think that Miranda Maverick's going to be the bully here. I think Miranda Maverick is... The striking's going to be pretty close, but the wrestling and grappling, I think Maverick's going to have a big advantage there. And if Andrea Lee's just getting put on her back and getting grappled on for, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes at a time, then I think that that's really going to, again, put her back into that place where, she's crumbling a little bit, she's demoralised, not really sure what to do, and then the fight only gets worse from then. So that's the way I see the fight going. I'm picking Miranda Maverick to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. It's actually not turned out as long as I thought it was going to be, especially after I broke down the main event and the co-main event, which I did spend a lot more time on. So yeah, we haven't even hit the hour mark. Pretty happy with that. Got plenty of content in there. Remember, if you are wanting to jump into the action this weekend, having a bit of betting fun, or if you are a long-term player and you want the long-term official bets from myself to help you win long-term, I've been doing this almost 8 years tracked, and I'm still beating the bookies. So long-term, I'm profitable, and within that 1%, if you are wanting to follow those bets, then you can do that on MMA Play 365. If you're not interested in me whatsoever and you're just wanting to follow what the AI is putting out there, Bayes AI, our UFC prediction software, as I said in the introduction, the handicapper advice and the Bayes AI predictions from our algorithms are not in two different packages. You get it all for the same subscription. So make sure you check it all out on MMAplay365.com. Aside from that, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. As always, if you are jumping onto the YouTube platform, please make sure you drop a subscription to the channel. It really helps us. If you're on one of the podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, then you can jump over on YouTube as well if you want to. Drop your comments in there. Tell me who you're betting on. Tell me if we disagree on any fighters, and I'm sure we can have that conversation. It is me that replies to the YouTube comments. So that's all from me. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next weekend.